Here with Tim Beattie on this episode of Analog Dialogue. How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you, Brody?
I'm doing well, man. It's
Yeah.
great to have you on. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, no, it's great to be on. I'm really into what the community that you're cultivating here with the podcast and everything else. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
Sweet.
Nice to talk
Nice.
to you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
been ages, hasn't it, since we
It
really.
it has been a while, probably since like I don't know, some sort of guitar festival back in Hamilton, maybe however many years ago.
Yeah, I don't know, 2018 perhaps. Might
Yeah.
have been
Yeah.
might have been a lot. Might have been more than 3 years. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's
good
hard
to
to
see.
it's hard to tell during the pandemic how many years have passed.
It's true. It kind of felt like 10 years in one, but anyway.
Yeah. So just before we get things rolling, for anyone watching who's never heard of what you do, could you sort of describe your presence in the arts industry?
Sure. Well, I mean, most obvious is that I'm a guitarist, play guitar, specifically classical guitar. That's where I've been sort of specializing in the last, like, I'd say 7 or 8 years, particularly. Although um, I am into electric and acoustic and all sorts of genres. The main medium and passion in the last number of years has been classical guitar, um, which does make me a bit of a hermit, soloistically minded. I spend a lot of hours in a room alone, um, nitpicking every little every little sound and movement. But equally, it's really nice to make music with other people. So um, I try as much as possible to to get into chamber music and that sort of thing, or even just to jam with friends. So as much as I am a classical guitarist, I try not to be um, limited to one medium or one genre, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I didn't realize that you played electric and acoustic and other styles. Is that like what you started with?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, growing up, I kind of got into music really young because my my mom and uncle would always play music in church, especially and at home, and so my uncle being a firefighter, I was naturally looked up to him as somewhat of a hero, and because he played guitar, by extension, I thought guitar must be cool. So, I think I was like 2 years old. I was asking my parents for a guitar,
Wow.
with what few words that I had. I mean, I was nicknamed Poor Mute Timothy by my uncle because I didn't really express myself all that much the first couple of years, um, but I had enough to ask for the guitar, and so got my hands on one when I was two. I mean, couldn't even tune that one, but yeah, I guess initially it was more acoustic guitar oriented, a lot of pop music, a lot of worship music in church, and I after taking some lessons for a couple of years, I started really getting into like blues guitar. um, I got an electric when I was 9 years old. I got my first Mexican Strat, and so I started playing a bunch of Chuck Berry, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, getting into blues and rock kind of stuff. Stevie Ray Vaughan was my biggest kind of inspiration around
Mm.
that time. I just remember on a road trip, um, taking my Walkman CD player on a road trip, on our way on a family vacation, and I listened like to the Chuck Berry and the Stevie Ray box set on this trip down to Florida. So I was really inspired by that music, but um, when I started to express a desire, quite young still, around 10, 11 years old, a desire to pursue music maybe in the future, like for a living. Um, my parents were adamant that I still pursue university study, and therefore I have to at least take classical guitar lessons on the side, even if that's not my main interest. So
Mm-hmm.
begrudgingly, I did start some classical guitar lessons with a local teacher in Barrie, who I'd been taking the blues lessons with for years, and then after a year or so of doing some RCM uh, classical stuff with Joe, my teacher in Barrie, my my mom found a summer workshop up in Sauble Beach that
Mm-hmm.
you might know Sauble Beach Guitar Festival, because obviously, Jeff McFadden, big figure in Hamilton, Toronto guitar scenes, Canadian guitar scene in general, but he runs that great festival up in Sauble, which is essentially just a week-long study course, where you have the chance to learn from some of the greatest guitarists around the world, just friends of Jeff's, who he gets to fly in, and from around Canada, US, and abroad. So I was maybe 12 or 13 the first time that I went to that workshop, and that was where I saw my first classical guitar concert. Met Bob Hamilton, who I ended up studying with at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, and yeah, that was maybe one of the biggest, maybe the one of the earliest and biggest, or most pivotal moments, musically speaking, was going to that festival, just having the the sense that there are all these other people around me, interested in many of the same things,
Right.
and
Yeah.
also um, being able to express so many things I never thought possible on this one instrument, really opens up a whole world of sounds and characters. Seeing it being done by world-class practitioners right in front of you, it really opened my eyes, and so those early years, it was really mainly like blues and rock, but then eventually I started to become convinced by the classical approach, and listening to more and more classical music, and so it became my passion, and obviously that's what I've chosen to study, and that. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I do point to Sabel as being one of the first catalysts for this classically oriented pursuit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's super cool. Like, I mean, obviously, going back and thinking about your like your experience sort of or sort of experiencing music in the church, and then going to these festivals and sort of being surrounded by other guitar players, being able to watch and learn from from players of like very high caliber. um you know it just sort of demonstrates like the importance of like of a musical community, right? um
Mhm.
and I guess um just sort of wonder like how how do you see that role of like a community playing in what you do? Because I mean, you said that it tends to be a very like independent solo thing right now, but in your upbringing it was
Mhm.
very much a communal thing. So how do you I guess
Yeah,
how do you sort of balance
square.
that? Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I mean, obviously, just being able to partake, being welcomed into different musical and art space communities, growing up, this served me immeasurably. Like that, this is probably the only reason why um, I'm I feel capable of expressing myself through music, and also why I also was able to nurture my curiosity. What was
Hmm.
initially just curiosity, no real um, natural skill or something. Like it's all just based on what you're inclined towards, and then you work at it for years and years and develop the skill that matches your curiosity over time. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't been surrounded by all these people who were both experts, but also so generous um, and giving with their time and knowledge, just out of their free will. And so like the whole community that exists around Sobel, but Guitar Society of Toronto, for example, which I started to attend concerts and participate in, like the community guitar orchestra and those outreach and education opportunities that they provide there, as a result of being connected with those people just at a summer workshop, and so I started attending those international concert series and going to see master classes when there were students playing at the university, for visiting artists, just taking in whatever information I could. And although I was usually one of the younger people around, always there's so many people there who I could name that maybe took me under their wing or just helped me kind of understand a bit more what's going on, get what I could out of it. And so there's the whole Guitar Society community. There's obviously community around church and fellowship there that I was participating in a lot growing up, and then larger arts community in Barrie, just friends around town who are into music or literary or visual arts, and obviously joining the conservatory in Toronto. Eventually, I was invited to join the pre-college young artists program there, and having the chance to hang around all these young virtuosos, these child geniuses. Like, as a 16-year-old, I was in theory class, sat beside 9-year-olds who were way quicker at solving these Bach chorales and whatever else, whatever other prompts we were given. But it was, there have been, I could point to all these different pockets and communities, but ultimately, what we do as artists, like as much as we have to develop and cultivate our craft and our own expressive voice, it's an inherently social and human thing. Like we're trying to connect with each other through our common humanity by expressing ourselves in these abstract ways. So the only way to do that as an individual is by learning from and communing with other people who are doing the same things and doing different things, and just keeping an open mind, being open to any opportunity to learn. Or
yeah. Is that what is that what attracts you to academia?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a huge part of being in an academic institution, is just the community within that, and especially in a conservatory environment. You're just naturally going to be surrounded by people who are working, and so there's a bit of the there's the networking, like the common kind of aims and dialogues that can occur, but then also it's just a matter of being inspired by how hardworking the people around you are, and how deeply other people think, and how about what they're doing, and how thoroughly their process is developed over so many years. Like everybody carries with them a different um, perspective and history of probably many mentors showing them, you know, adding to their process and their knowledge. And so yeah, being in higher ed, you're constantly surrounded by people who challenge you and who inspire you, and who nurture your own growth. And hopefully it's a mutual thing, you know. Hopefully we all find a commonality in that. And I think it does happen. That's really why I'm sticking to it. But also there's you know, there are other reasons to stay in school. Like obviously I'm studying abroad, so like there are many opportunities, artistically speaking, outside of my studies that I wouldn't necessarily be able to engage in if I wasn't living, you know, in Scotland or living in Amsterdam before. As a student, probably wouldn't have been possible um, to engage in other communities and other, say, festivals and other performance opportunities and learning opportunities on this side of the world. So yeah, in a way, it is also just a visa thing. It does. And a bit of a safety net too. There's a sort of like, you know, I've just finished my master's degree, and I feel a certain cowardice about, you know, just facing the real world, facing like working life outside of this kind of safety net of being a student.
Sure.
That's something like, even something on a practical side, like having to pay council tax when I'm not a student. But then as well, just like, say, psychologically speaking about my arts based practice, there's less of a, maybe a notion that I need to produce, when as long as I can self-identify as a student. It's more about growth and development, which is, I think, a lifelong thing anyway, if we're going to do this properly. But
Yeah, yeah.
but I think that's probably, as I'm trying to transition into, you know, more doing art for a living. And you know, I'm managing so far to find income in the arts, and to support myself just based on my music practice. But that transition between, you know, being a student, qualifying for certain grants and that sort of thing, into just pure working life, that's a fearsome kind of road, especially if you're looking to be a freelance musician in the middle of a pandemic. So um so yeah, there's also a part of it is just being fearful.
Yeah. But I think you're like your sort of underlying curiosity and like the sort of drive to continue to learn and continue to pursue the instrument and the art form altogether. Um
Mhm.
I think as long as you have that, you know, then once you're out of school, I don't know that, you know, that learning and pursuit of, like, you know, of like sort of achieving something greater, I don't think that goes away.
No, I don't think it does either. In fact, I think that it just becomes necessity to survive as an artist. But um, perhaps the big difference that I fear, and that I also kind of experience outside of term time, for example, and particularly in a time when we're just less busy, you know, there are fewer gigs going around, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
um, is the lack of, say, accountability, and like
Mm,
um, of
yeah.
of you know, external elements of pressure, that as much as I'd like to say that I'm um, self-motivated, and I consider myself to be. I don't know if I could get anywhere without a bit of motivation, but um, I, I still tend towards laziness, and I think many of us do. So there's that need to have people around you in your life who will push you to
Right.
pursue your goals, and who will be able to challenge your ideas like directly, head on, and force you to think more critically, and to maybe reorganize or follow a slightly different trajectory. And that's a huge part of what I look for in a mentor,
Mm.
say, especially in university. Like, that's so much of what goes into the choice of where to study. I think as a musician, it does come down to who will your main professor or professors be. Who's my guitar instructor going to be? Who will my thesis advisor be? um, who can I look to on a regular basis for this period of time, for guidance, for constructive feedback, for criticism where it's necessary, for um, for for new ideas, for hopefully you know uh, somebody who can open up more doors, push me towards the right
Right.
direction in the future. Um, there's a lot of that you look that I've found in so many mentors, and these relationships certainly don't just end when you graduate or get the certificate.
Right.
Um, ultimately, we're in relationships, friendships with everyone we work with, and it's a matter of just staying connected, um, and finding ways um, to help each other, um, contribute to each other's practice. So, but that's a challenging thing I think to maintain. So I'm just worried, uh, if on the outside of education, whether I can maintain that sort of momentum.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like you have some pretty deep roots in, in the, at least in the guitar community. Um,
Mm.
that doesn't seem like you have to worry about that.
No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, for sure.
Yeah.
It is just a the the reality of being a student. I think um, it's maybe easier to warrant the discovery and the searching and the self-involved kind of aspects of art, where
Mm.
I'm following my own curiosity trail. I'm looking into this particular area of music, this particular historical figure, or whatever it might be, just out of my own interest, and investing a lot of time in that, which you can afford to do as a student when you're given these hours in a day,
Yeah.
um, that where you can just express your creativity or follow your curiosity.
Yeah.
And
And you're expected to.
yes, exactly, it's necessary. So if you don't do it, then you get kicked out. So but whereas you look on the outside, and ultimately, um, a lot of the what we need, I think, for something sustainable as a musician, right, is you need like an income ultimately, and a steady one. So it's probably gonna involve doing things for other people, not for yourself, right? And
Yeah.
that's so there's that sort of selfishness of being a student as well, that just allows
Mm.
you to focus on your own things. I can focus on my trio project. I can focus on um, my developing my solo programs, or maybe I can explore interdisciplinary um, based projects, but out of my own volition, and telling my
Mm.
own story. So um, there's also just a lot of fun having this time to to learn and grow, but self-directedly in
Mm.
a
Yeah.
large part.
Yeah. So what is it that like drives you to create?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I don't know. I think um it's about it, obviously we're just expressing emotions is the cliche way of putting it, right? It's just a way of expressing yourself that probably um those of us who are less articulate can't manage to express these deep emotions so clearly. I mean, that's one of the most difficult things for me to do, is expressing my feelings like with vocabulary. So it's very uncomfortable, isn't it? So it's nice to lean into the darker moments or areas of my mind, or the more complicated webs. um the angst that I had as a kid, as a teenager. A lot of that um was drawn out by turning up the distortion on my guitar, and or putting on my boxing gloves and punching the bag, or you know taking 1,000 slap shots out on the driveway, something like that. But I think creativity is something that allows you to channel your your energy, your thoughts, your emotions, experiences,
Mm.
um, into something that can be potentially useful, hopefully, and ideally useful for other people. And that's certainly what I found in art. Like as a primarily classical musician, most of my time is taken up um, reinterpreting somebody else's work. You know, someone's composed a piece of music, and there's a sort of script that you have to follow, but then the
Mm.
creativity comes in, that space in between the structure of the piece and the actual sonorities produced by the instrument. You have a bunch of dots on a page, and yeah, it gives you like the information in terms of pitch and rhythm, but nothing beyond that. So you have to be able to connect somehow with that composer's humanity, with their creative spirit, with take into consideration the social and historical context, maybe by reading letters from the composer, or whatever, finding a way to contextualize an abstract form of creativity from somebody else produced maybe hundreds of years ago. And there is each time there's something I learn, and something that I can get out of that for myself, just by exploring somebody else's um
Mm.
expressive language. and
Yeah.
um and I think that's what we try to do as practitioners, like as performers. You take um, a piece of art, and um, you reinterpret it in a new context, and try to make it identifiable for the people around you. And take for example John Dowland. I've been studying a lot of John Dowland's lute music, and one of the great Renaissance composers in England for lute. And he so much of his music was based on this uh, Renaissance poetry that's sort of romantically idealized the idea of um, melancholy.
Mm.
This emotion that we all can feel, and has been expressed in the arts and music in particular in so many different different ways and different mediums, genres, and all of that. But with Dowland, um, there's every piece of music, even the instrumental music, it's so clearly linked to his poetry, or the poetry that he's taken from others and set on the music, and the spirit of that poetry, the ability to take an idea like melancholy and face it, face your dark emotions, the depressive and the void, the whatever it is that your personal internal struggle, and you use the negative emotion as a means of rehabilitation. You lean into it, you express it with a medium that's outside of your body, with music, with painting. You lean into that feeling. You take everything you can from it. You try to learn from it, and then, but you ultimately are facing it in order to overcome it, right? And so that's something that I think we can all get out of art, just by listening to somebody play, by going to the gallery and looking at paintings, by going to see a modern dance performance. We can all get something that just that allows you to face and overcome yourself and life. The deeper and the sort of the deeper struggles that connect everybody. I think we can't really express these things outside of art, and art is what allows us to recognize each other's struggles and to support each other, and then also to recognize each other's joys and to support each other in that. It's about expressing empathy and love for each other, for humanity. Like that's what creativity gives you, is the ability to connect with other people on a level that is really challenging, and if not impossible to get to through conversation. So
yeah, but it's a bit of a funny game to play sometimes, though, when you're interpreting music, right? Because the composer might have a very clear intention of what they want to express in their art, right? In that form of creation, and then the performer can take it, and that interpretation can potentially completely change that message. So how do you sort of ride that line of finding this rep that um that presents a certain emotion or feeling or ideal, and injecting yourself into it?
Yeah, I guess it's the kind of that question of like, what are you going after? Is it like the composer's intention, or is it your interpretation
Right.
of it?
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, it's always your interpretation of it, whether or not you are going after the composer's intention. But I mean, I think that, so say take more modern scores. Composers don't have any trust for performers. We've created all these different codes and languages to articulate like performance prompts, like down to the like this, when you get especially into serial music, where every single note has to be articulated in a specific way, with a specific volume, specific dynamic, and taken within the greater context. Composers have lost faith in performers by and large. But when you look at old scores, say like Bach, we all play Bach probably. If you've studied classical music, you've studied some Bach at one point. You look at the manuscripts, the urtext of those Bach, whatever, lute suites or violin sonatas, cello suites, there are almost no performance indications, by contrast. So,
Right.
and that's because the composers at that time had so much more faith in the musicians, that their knowledge of the practice, the like in between the notes, what is it that like this, how do we approach the style, how do we differ, say, in modern terms, how do you differentiate like rock music from electronic music? I mean, it's pretty easy and obvious for most people to grasp that, right? But then you apply that same kind of characterization to Baroque suites. How do you differentiate like an Allemande from a Sarabande? Like, it's very difficult to glean the difference just by looking at the score, So, but then by reading about what other musicians and music critics were saying at the time about those scores and about how they were being performed and about how they were being danced to in the social occasions where they'd be presented, at parties and in salons. Ultimately, the music that we play from that time, is popular. It was popular music. It was secular music of the time, and it was used in an entirely different context than where we tend to present that music nowadays. But we have to figure a way now to get closer to that sort of, say, vibe, or that the idiom of the music, right?
Sure.
Of, say, the Baroque dance movement, or like the classical sonata, sonata allegro, or whatever it might be. There's an onus on the interpreter to educate themselves, but through listening to the many different, lauded performances and interpretations of similar music from all different instrumentations, and then by using that sort of oral education you get just by listening, that can feed into your intuition with different styles from different eras. But ultimately, it is this sort of perfect connection between your intuition, the sort of academic, dry historical knowledge that you might have, and then the technical facility that you've developed on the instrument itself, and then you try to combine those three together, and that's sort of, roughly speaking, my view of what an interpretation is as it pertains to a piece of guitar music or something. So, I mean, there's so much more to it, but ultimately it is this sort of coalescence of intuition, knowledge, and facility, and then you put those together, and that's sort of your voice in that particular genre or in that particular piece, but in that particular moment as well, because we're constantly developing all of those aspects of it, right? You're constantly developing your musical intuition just by doing the other things, just by listening and playing and reading and talking to people, and then we're constantly developing our technique by developing our ear, by listening and by learning from others, and by reading more, and say taking lessons or master classes. So it all sort of feeds together into that expressive voice that each one of us has. I don't know. It's a strange balance to strike, and that's a very vague answer to your question of like, how do you balance composer's intention and your own sort of take on that. What it is. I don't know. I think it's ultimately, there's a mix of objective characteristics we look for in certain music that just agreed upon. That's how it is that we have a tradition and systems for learning, and then there's that entirely subjective part to it as well, which is just that almost none of us can actually describe in practical terms, but it's just like that extra little bit of zest or oomph that certain performers have, that just like you can't really say what it is exactly, but it's captivating. You're so convinced by that interpretation or by that performance, but I'm not entirely sure why. And I think part of it a, is arriving at a personal conviction yourself.
Mm.
Even though we always are developing your approach to your art, in the moment when you perform it, when you choose to share it with somebody or with an audience. Yeah, if it isn't done convictedly, then we won't be convinced, and then it feels like there's an imbalance between what the composer wanted you to do or wanted it to sound like, and how it was interpreted by that individual performer. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I can tell you from having heard you play in person and, seeing the performances that you've done, online, um, that, you can really see the amount of care that you put into the music that you're creating, and the amount of thought and consideration is very apparent in it, and it comes through. So thank you for doing what you do, because it makes for great music.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, no, it's always just exciting to share what you found in something, isn't it? Whenever there's a chance to
Yeah.
play, especially playing live,
Yeah.
which we've all missed that feeling, and maybe that's what's been difficult about being an artist in this past year, especially, isn't it? It's like we can spend all this time thinking about it and working on it, but ultimately it has to be shared. It has to
Yeah.
be shared, and it can't just be thrown out there. We need feedback. We want it to affect people, you know
Yeah.
whether negatively or positively. I just want it to affect people.
Yeah.
I welcome any feedback whatsoever, and that's kind of the biggest thing that's missed, that we've missed out on in this last year and a half almost, is whenever there have been chances to share music, to perform, as it were, it's always in the a pre-recorded gig, or if it's a
Right.
live stream, regardless of how it's been being done in the format or otherwise. You're playing into a vacuum.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
without that social aspect of it, even from a performance perspective, like that you miss everything. It's actually difficult to feel convicted yourself about what you're doing in the moment. Doesn't matter that I've prepared it for 100 hours or whatever, but it doesn't matter, because if you're not getting that sort of feedback and engagement with somebody else and feeding off of each other's emotions and energy in the room, as kind of spiritualistic as that in new age as that might sound, that's like genuinely what does happen on a sort of metaphysical level. We do pick up on each other's reactions,
Yes.
just intuitively, when you're sitting in a room together, and
Hmm.
particularly when there's the energy of, like, everybody has their mind and energy centered on one thing, on maybe one person or one group of people on a stage, one particular act or presentation. There's a certain, like, power and weight in that moment that's like, um it kind of takes over anything else that you might be feeling in the moment. You just can't really think about or focus on anything else other than what's going on stage. When I've been to a great concert, and I've been to some great concerts, but, like, I think, for example, seeing Velodos play, famous Russian pianists play in Amsterdam several times. Um, there was one concert in particular. I was sat really close to the piano, and there is nothing else in the world when you're there as a listener, and you're and there and the performer or the performers are doing it properly and really totally convinced themselves and totally just like engulfed in the music. It's just in every fiber of their being, you know. And somebody like Volodos, that's the case. You're there, and as a listener, like there's nothing else around you that you can't consider that anything else exists in reality, because it's just the sounds and the emotions therewith that like totally captivate you as a listener. So that's like, and that's something we're just never going to be able to get from a screen, through a screen, or you know, through the headphones. As much as it's nice to experience it on an individual level, you know, I do like to sit down with my with you know, pop on the Spotify and have a nice cry with some Simon and Garfunkel, but like in a corner alone. But ultimately, it's really that communal part of it that we're missing out on, and that I think everybody is itching for now. I think it's going to be so much better when we get back to it, because we've all recognized like how much you miss just being there at a live gig, enjoying a performance like with friends, just being able to marvel at the you know, the jazz combo at the pub, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
Don't you find that that's one of the biggest things that also inspires you as an artist, you know, is just having
Definitely.
that.
Yeah, even if it's just from a very practical sense of like, oh, I've never heard this piece before, right? This just presenting new music, new ideas, but being there in the space, hearing the hearing the craft of the instrument, hearing the touch of the musician, and seeing them sort of disappear into another plane of existence, and
Mm.
and you know, being on that ride with them, you
Mm.
can't get that online. You just can't.
No.
You have to be there.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
So,
For sure. Yeah.
um, just before we wrap up today, are there any projects that you have coming up that we can look forward to?
All right. Well, actually, yes. I'm really excited. I have a real live gig at the end of the month, socially distanced and everything, but you know, outdoors, but at Perth Concert Hall. Now that's in Perth, Scotland. And then the 6th to 9th of August, I believe it is, the GuitarFest West, this guitar festival in Calgary. That's taking place, but online. Um, and I'll be, as part of that festival, I'll be giving a little performance, like live stream performance. Also, like so that's first week of August. And then, yeah, more in the fall. So there's a couple of things with my trio and some chamber gigs and things that I'll probably have more details in place closer to the date, because it's crazy kind of organizing any event these days. There's so many protocols and things you have to go through, hoops you have to jump through. But yeah, you know, if anyone's interested in checking out what I'm up to, you can follow me on, you know, the normal channels, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I'm not really a Twitter user, but and you know, there's info. I'll probably pop some info on there if I can remember to, leading up to most of those events. And yeah, no, Brody, it's been like lovely to to chat. I hope we can connect again soon. Eh?
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And links to all those things that you just mentioned are going to be in the description of the video too. So folks watching can easily find those and check out what you're doing. So Tim, thanks so much for coming on and chatting today. This was great. I really enjoyed this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.